and let's get at it. I have a lot of questions here, Michael, some doozies, and I have everything from what's your favorite flavor of ice cream to what's the future of the school. So we'll start with what's your favorite flavor of ice cream. We'll move our way downward.
Hands down vanilla. Sorry.
Vanilla?
But it's just vanilla. You got it.
Why are you clapping? Vanilla? Okay, well, whatever. We'll cross that. How about this? This is a good one. I should have had the name of the people, but I didn't tell them I was doing that. Why did you come to Briercrest in the first place? / how did God bring you here? And this is a double question because it's as a student and as the president.
Well, I'll answer as a student first. I came here as a student. I've shared in chapel before, I was not raised in a Christian home. I came to faith through the Gideon New Testament that had been given to me. And really through my teen years was wonderfully integrated into a really healthy church where quite quickly and early in my faith, I had a pull. I didn't use the word call, I didn't know the word call, but I had a pull to Christian ministry and to some sort of service vocationally. And so I actually had applied to go to a small school in Toronto, which is where I was living. But in August, just before school was to start, a very good friend of mine, a mentor, invited me to a fundraising event for Briercrest. And it was at that fundraising event where I heard a number of faculty members, the president at the time, Henry Budd, and a singing team, 4 guys and 4 gals. And they shared their testimony, and that experience, the energy, the sense of expectancy and optimism and vision that I heard that night just caused me to take a dramatic shift. And so I applied right away and ended up coming here instead of that school in Toronto. And that was a significant night for me. In terms of coming here in my present role, I was a pastor before coming here, for those who don't know, and I was a pastor for 30 years. And I loved the church, and I loved my church. We were there for 19 years. For a number of years before coming here, I served on the board for Briercrest. Truly enjoyed that. But when Dr. Dwayne Uglum stepped down, there was some time that lapsed. There was a search committee, but the board invited me to consider that. And initially my response was no. I was so grounded and attached to the church we were serving. And our kids had life-shaping experiences there. We just had deep, deep roots. But I think a number of factors caused God to slowly uproot me. One was the board's invitation. Secondly, God started to stir in my heart a change. And thirdly, the prospect of somehow being a part of equipping the next generation of leaders inspired me in a deep way. And so while I continue to love the church and loved my church, those 3 things, I think, pulled me here. And that was a hard decision, tremendously hard decision for my wife and I. We prayed many nights, many days, fasted. We wrestled with that. It was one of the harder decisions I've had to make. Not because I was leaving something I so desperately loved. But that's a snapshot.
That's how it goes. Thank you. So next question. I have written down here, how did you meet your wife? But I got a message, how did you propose to your wife? So maybe you can tackle those together.
Okay, well, how did I meet my wife? It was in my first semester here. It was after the blood donor clinic. And we're in line in the old dining hall. And I was going to say this is uncharacteristic of my wife, but maybe I shouldn't say that. But she butted into line, and I had not met her yet. And that first interchange was a significant one for me. I will just say, though, we were friends for my time here, and then she studied nursing. And then I went to seminary, and she completed nursing and then started work. So our friendship was quite protracted, and our courtship was quite rapid once the timing was right. But that's how I met her. In terms of how I proposed to her, it was, You know what? It's kind of corny, so I think I'll just leave it as it was a very significant night for us both. And you know what? I will back up and say this. I will say this. I won't tell you about the corny part, but I will tell you about this. My wife won't mind me saying this. The first time I asked her, things were going very well, but she said, well, let's play it by ear. What do you do with that? But after several conversations later, I did get a yes.
Oh, wow. I don't think I have any questions harder than that.
Yeah, well,
coming up. Okay.
Decision making and my wife, they don't go hand in hand.
Let's get. Yeah, seriously, I know what you mean. Sorry, I'm kidding.
Okay, let's talk about
keep
Jason
going.
now.
Yikes. Let's get one more question about you here before we go further. But so this is a longer question. Were there jobs that you had growing up, or even in like more your career phase of life, that you didn't love, but you can share how God used it for good and in your life and in the lives of others?
Sure. Well, actually, let me back right up. I was raised in a home where my father was quite harsh in so many ways, but I say this with tremendous gratitude. He instilled in me a very strong work ethic, and from as long as I can remember, no exaggeration, from as long as I can remember, Saturdays were work days. It wasn't chore day. My father used the word work, and I worked, and I worked all day, and was able to clean up and watch Bugs Bunny at 5 o'clock on Saturdays. But largely labor, construction work, and that began to build in me a strong work ethic. And then through high school, summer jobs, part-time jobs, and then while I was in education, largely factory work. Served as a technician in some contexts as well. And I would say, particularly the factory work, absolutely profoundly mind-numbing. And yet they did afford opportunities for conversation as you worked, and I often had some tremendous spiritual conversations. But I think the takeaway for me was that I was instilled first by my father and then by these early work experiences that even with jobs that you do not like and that you deeply dislike, you can honor your employer and you can work hard and do your best. And I'm so grateful for the seasons I've had in church ministry. On a grand scheme, I love the church and I love pastoral ministry. And I wish more of you would entertain that and seek God if that would be something God would have for you. But there are seasons in pastoral ministry which you do not like. There are days you do not like and you blast through. And I love my role here, and there are things that I do not like, and you have to blast through it. And so work ethic and honoring the responsibilities you have were lessons that I think I learned young.
Nice, thank you, Michael. I got questions flowing in here, guys, but the people that did it before time are going to get priority. So just if your question doesn't get answered, I'm sorry, but we'll try to get to all of them. Let's transition to some questions about Briercrest. First one here is, how have you seen Briercrest change since you became president?
It's actually a hard question because when you're in it, it's sometimes harder to see that objectively, and it's not sometimes until you extract yourself that you're able to observe. I'll answer it this way in terms of changes that I'm seeing. Certainly, I have great respect for every season that Briercrest has been in, and honor tremendously the leaders before. And whenever you make changes, you're unsettled because you recognize it's just perhaps a necessary change. It's not making something necessarily better. Sometimes you hope it is, and sometimes it's just different. So I have great respect for previous administrations and the previous work of other leaders and other seasons of boards. I think here's what I hope has changed. I'll answer it this way. Through the late 90s and the early 2000s, many schools like Briercrest pursued hard for university recognition, or at least authorized recognition of their degrees. And some schools, many schools across the nation achieved university status, and Briercrest was in those same conversations. Unfortunately, a number of our degrees have been recognized and authorized by the province, but we were in those same conversations in the 90s and 2000s. In that process and during that season, I think the good was some significant strides in enhancing educational quality took place. I think also during that time, though, there was a little bit of blurring of our brand identity. So what was Briercrest now about? And one of the things we did a number of years ago was we removed the word Bible from our name for some very specific strategic reasons, but we did not clearly communicate that with our constituency. It created brand confusion. And I like to think over the last number of years we have clarified that brand identity, that we are Briercrest College, we are Briercrest Academy, and we are Briercrest Seminary. We are 3 Christ-centered Bible-anchored ministry-focused schools. We have the highest recognized level of education in terms of ABHE and in terms of the province, but we're still called a college. But the mission is what matters. The mission is what matters. And I like to think there's been some enhanced brand identity understanding externally and hopefully internally as well.
Really, really helpful. This is maybe a follow-up, and I'm not sure I fully understand the question, so this will be good for you to explain. The question is there a possibility of our biblical studies, theology, and Christian ministry degrees becoming accredited like our psych, humanities, English, and humanities?
Like our last part?
Like our psych and our history and our English and our humanities, like that, I guess, yeah, that accreditation or whatever.
And so the answer is yes and no, some yes, some no. So I'll answer it this way. In terms of authorized degrees, we presently have English, history, humanities, and psychology, and it's quite a costly endeavor and an extended responsibility and job to authorize a degree, at least the path that the province of Saskatchewan has put us through. And so we will proceed to authorize more degrees at a measured pace. But our ministry degrees, they are recognized and they are credentialed by the Association of Biblical Higher Education. And those degrees have been credentialed for over 40 years. We could authorize our biblical studies degrees because those take place also in public universities. So we could authorize biblical studies, but we wouldn't be authorizing theology degrees. The province has really, they recognize our education, but they would not be authorizing our ministry degrees.
Okay, yeah.
So if that was the question, I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Question. I don't have it ready, so I'll grab another from here. Here's an open-ended one. What's the projected future of the college? And I have a few follow-up questions like growth, more programs, less programs, and I had a lot of questions come in that were similar, like where are we going? You know, kind of like a general question was the feeling. So
right. Let me answer it this way. These are, I'll say this. The future is the mission. We are going to keep working the mission. The mission is what we do. We call one another to seek the kingdom of God, to be profoundly shaped by the scriptures, and to be formed spiritually and intellectually for lives of service. Christ-centered, Bible-anchored, ministry-focused. And our aspiration, our preferred future is equipping the church engaged in the world. And that has to be central. And as long as we keep doing that, that's our future. Now, I'll just say this in terms of the grander educational landscape, or at least the grander landscape in Christian higher education. Association of Biblical Higher Education Schools, of which we've been accredited for some 40 years, they've seen some 40 closures in the last 10 years. Christian Higher Education Canada, CHEC, that association of 35, 36 Christian colleges and universities across Canada are struggling. We're repeatedly told that if you are holding your own, if you're flat, you're healthy. These are indeed challenging days. Let me just share one more backstory as I'm moving towards that answer. The Evangelical Fellowship of Canada tells us that in 1996, 12% of Canadians self-identified as evangelical. 19 years later, that had dropped to 9% in 2015. In 2019, just last year, it had dropped to 6%. And so the Canadian church, the Canadian evangelical church, is going through significant contraction. And we have a symbiotic relationship with the church. And so for schools like ours to hold our own is deeply significant. So what's our future? We're going to press forward in the mission of resourcing the church, equipping the church, helping the church to be as healthy as possible, and to engage the world to bear witness and bring benefit in any way we can. Now, more recently, and you heard this in chapel last semester at some point, some significant data has come out telling us what we've already known, but it hasn't improved, that two-thirds of young adults will leave the church when they finish high school. And half of that number will completely abandon the faith. So what we're saying now is, well, before we can equip the church and engage the world, we need to help the next generation keep the faith. So what's our future? We want to serve the mission of Christ by helping your generation, first and foremost, hold on to their faith, and then become passionate followers of Christ such that you want to equip the church and engage the world. Now, we're going to build buildings and have more programs. Well, we'll see about that. In terms of programs, I think a question was asked, and growth in programs. Growth, well, we all aspire to growth. We've seen growth in the seminary. The seminary has grown by 50% the last 2-3 years. The college and the academy have been fairly stable. We want to see growth. We've got some early growth indicators, but we keep press forward. In terms of programs are expensive too, and so we will start new programs in a measured way as their resources. And frankly, there are times when you have to shut down programs.
Thank you, Michael. Another really good question here. What role does the president play here, and what are some of the things Michael does in his role on a regular basis?
Okay, I lead the team, the executive leadership team, and I serve as the apex, the connector between the board, they're my boss, the board of directors, and the executive team. And the way our governance structure works is this way. The board determines our strategic ends. Where is this institution going? The means, how we get there, what we do to get there, is determined by staff, of which I lead then. So I'm the connector between board and staff, and then we worry about executing the means. And so I work with my team to do just that. In terms of a little bit more flesh to that, I travel a fair amount, representing the school, public relations, speaking in churches, a lot of alumni relations, a lot of fundraising. And so a good part of my role is representing the school, raising funds, alumni connections. And so when I'm on the road, that's usually what I'm engaged in. So I would say it's probably maybe 60% here, 40% external.
Awesome. All right, to ease off for a little bit
Thank
here,
you.
I've got, hey, Michael. Pardon me. Hey, Michael, what is your favorite song right now / growing up?
Oh, my favorite song.
Maybe that's not an easier one. I don't know.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I will just say, in terms of my go-to artist, which will not be any surprise, and many of you would think that's a predictable answer, but enjoy Lauren Daigle in terms of listening to her music, her worship music, and her music. In terms of older songs, there was a band that came from here, some came from here, the Jans team, called Deliverance. Look them up, Spotify, whatever. And in terms of significant music from the past, and few faculty here will remember them, I'll say Deliverance.
All right. I'm sorry, I have a cold here. Why aren't we allowed to dance? Question mark.
Well, I'll tell you why I can't dance. Why can't we dance? Well,
I didn't give him that one before, so.
Joking aside, for a hang of a lot of us, it is a rhythmic issue. I think the era that I grew up in, there was a lot of attached rules that we connected with our sanctification, oftentimes inappropriately. But I think there was some significant association attachments to some practices that had the potential of being suggestive and inappropriate. And I think we continue to, in measure, experience that. Having said that, David danced the Lord, and I've been at so many Christian weddings where there's been very appropriate, wonderful dances. And so, what is dance, and what does that look like, and who's dancing, and what's the choreography look like? So that's not a very good answer, but that's probably an honest one.
That's a fine answer, actually. We did have RU teams here for a long time.
For sure.
So it's not like Briercrest is against dancing.
Yeah, and so it's not all dance, but I think I was knowing where the question was coming from.
All right. Would you rather have toothpicks for legs or crutches for arms? Toothpicks for legs or crutches for arms? I think the answer is actually pretty clear, but over to you. Toothpick for legs or crutches for arms?
Oh my goodness.
Now I think you could do something with a crutch for an arm, but with toothpicks.
Yeah, I know you're stuck. You're stuck.
Okay, well we can move on. Do you want a fan page?
Do I want a fan page?
Fan page.
No, I'll pass.
You'll leave
on that.
Okay. Okay. Oh man, I have a few more funny ones, but maybe with the time moving on, we can. What? I almost feel sheepish asking this question now. What are the key characteristics of a godly leader? That's a tough transition.
No, yeah. I'm still thinking about the toothpicks, actually. Yeah. Well, when I read certainly 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, the qualifications for an elder, not that we'll all be elders, but I think the qualifications and standards that are spoken there are to be strived for. And it's interesting when you look at those lists together, I think there's 13 or 14 of them. I think one or two, and I'd have to review it again, but one or two are competency-based and the others are all character. And they're largely how we treat other humans. And so while the scriptures repeatedly tell us to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, strength, 1 John repeatedly tells us the way we put flesh to that is by the way we love one another. And I think Paul tells us that in Timothy and Titus as well, that character is internal, but it's lived out in how we relate one to another, and that's how we show our love for God, through our obedience and through our love for one another. So I think those qualities that we see in Timothy and Titus are a great place to start.
Question about the Keeping the Faith campaign, which I think all of us have heard about. We're trying to raise $8.9 million.
Yes.
The question was, where are we at in our $8.9 million? Where does the money go, and who decides? Was kind of the.
Okay. So with the Keeping the Faith campaign and the $8.9 million, the word we're using is our education fund, but frankly, there's no capital initiatives. There might be some improvement and renos and a new HVAC unit, or if we lose our heat, but there's no new buildings in that. It's completely to resource the education that takes place here. So let me just say this, and my numbers may not be exactly right, but if tuition for the college, if a full load room and board costs about $17,000, $17,500 in that range, it actually costs, I'll say us as in the institution, about $27,000, $28,000 a year. So we raise money to keep your educational fees as low as we possibly can. And I know we often hear that, education's expensive. It is expensive. And yet I want you to know we are doing everything we can to keep that from increasing at a more rapid rate as much as we possibly can. So the monies we're raising is for education. And I know you'll hear the word operations, it's for operations, but education is our operation. And yes, we have heat and light and clean the sidewalks, but everything we do is about students. And so that $8.9 million is going to fund the education that all of you and in all three schools are engaged in. And that decision is made through a budget process that budget managers, staff engage in, and the board approves.
Awesome. Thank you very much. What's one thing, no matter the situation, you think students should keep in mind?
Say again the first part?
Sorry. What's one thing, no matter the situation, you think students should keep in mind? So that's what's an important thing to keep in mind, I guess, as a student?
Wow, that's very broad. Let me just offer this because there's 100 different ways we could go, and I'll make it a compound answer. Think before you speak or act, and employ good judgment, wisdom. So opportunities that come, decisions that have to be made, responses, initiatives. Be thoughtful. And as you're in an educational context, you hear a lot about critical thinking. Critical thinking is thoughtfulness. And let's be thoughtful so that in the things we say and the decisions we make, they're God-honoring and they enhance the wonder of our relationship with Jesus.
How do you stay faithful in your walk with Christ day after day, year after year?
So I'm going to repeat myself from last week, but maybe I'll underscore it a bit more. When I became a Christian through the Gideon New Testament, a little burgundy thing that some of you perhaps have seen in other contexts. But there used to be a story that the Gideons had placed in it about a man named John Nicholson who made a promise to his mother to read the Bible every day. I came out of a home that was completely irreligious. I had gone to church half a dozen times in my life. And I was God-aware, but that's about it. And so when I dug out that little New Testament and I started reading the Bible and I read that story, the one thing that made sense to me was if I'm going to be a Christian, it makes sense that I read the Bible. And I made a decision then that I would read the Bible every day. And if there's anything you take away from your time here, it's that discipline. And I'll use the word discipline. I mean, I floss my teeth every day, and that's a discipline. I'm fine doing it. But disciplines are good things. They're not bad things. They're good things. But make that a cherished discipline, and more than anything else, it's my time with God every day. And I'm quick to admit sometimes it's routine, and I don't glean a lot, and it's a checkbox. I'll admit it. But it's a discipline that I maintain because there's so many days where it's just so rich, and God shows himself afresh, and it keeps me anchored in my walk with him, in my intimacy with him. And nothing for me is more important than that.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And we're running out of time, but on that note, the last question here is, what's your favorite or most meaningful verse or passage, and why?
Oh my. I actually have about 25 favorite verses, but the one I'll share with you that perhaps fits, and it ties into some questions that were asked, Psalm 78, 72, I believe it is. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands he led them. And I love that epitaph over David's life, is that he was a shepherd, and shepherds do three things. They protect, provide, guide. And that's what pastors do. That's what shepherds do. That's what leaders do. That's what kings should do. That's what managers should do. That's what we all should do as leaders, as parents. Protect, provide, guide. David shepherded them, but it says with integrity, heart, and skillful hands. There was a right heart. It was character. And there was competency with skillful hands. He had learned competencies. And so I always want to tend to the health of my soul. But I also want to grow in my capacity to influence and to be as effective as possible in terms of advancing God's kingdom agenda. And I think that was spoken well of David, and that verse anchors me.
Thank you, Michael. And you guys want to give him a hand? He took our questions really well. Friends, I meet with Michael bi-weekly, so I know I didn't get to all your questions, but if you have burning questions, you can come by my office anytime, and I can talk to Michael. There's other ways, but he's also a really approachable guy. So if you see him in the hall or CAF or Dining Hall, he is approachable. So please feel free to talk to him yourself too. Go in peace. It's 11. Serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.